Senator, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's my pleasure.
So we've had a lot of questions from our ASP community about election law for obvious reasons. And today we're going to focus on the Electoral Count Act, which is a law that senators have discussed reforming since 2020. So, Senator, first off, can you just tell us what is the Electoral Count Act?
Yeah, so the Electoral Count Act, and it might surprise people, it's a very old law. It was passed in 1887, and the intention in 1887 was to clarify constitutional language as it relates to the Electoral College, then the voting of the Electoral College votes, the role that the Vice President, the Congress plays in all of that. And now, of course, there's some thought that it wasn't done very well. But anyway, so that's what it is. It's 1887 law that many people think need to be modernized.
Senators from both parties have called for the Electoral Count Act to be reformed. What's your opinion? Does the Electoral Count Act need to be amended?
Yeah, I don't know, Chris. I'd be very careful about it. First of all, I think the Constitution's pretty clear about this. I don't know that we can improve a lot on what the Constitution says, but the original 10 Commandments were pretty darn good, and we've been trying to improve on them for a couple thousand years, and that doesn't work so well. But I do think you could maybe clarify the role. I think people are concerned about the role of the vice president, given, sort of what we're finding out about what the president wanted the vice president to do. But the thing about anytime you try to add to the Constitution or clarify the Constitution, you often feel the need to add to it. And that's where you can get in a little bit of trouble. When the Constitution doesn't give authority, or I don't think you should assume authority. So you can get in a little trouble even clarifying things. But I think you could perhaps clarify the limitations of the role of the vice president, and sort of leave it at that. What I wouldn't want to do is start going down the path of what states are supposed to do, or how states choose their electors, or how they bind their electors. But perhaps clarifying the ceremonial role of the vice president would help, going forward. We'll see.
That kind of speaks to actually a question we got from a lot of people. As you said, there was an unfortunate situation that was averted because the previous president wanted his vice president to not to certify the electors that the entire country had put forward. So what is the actual process of certifying those electors?
Yeah.
Can you break down if the vice president has any other functional role or just a ceremonial one?
Yeah, so I believe it's strictly ceremonial as per the Constitution and as per the Electoral Count Act of 1887. I think it's pretty well settled in the minds legally of most people, of most lawyers, that it's strictly ceremonial. So the two things that the Constitution says the vice president does, and it's pretty well confirmed in the law, is he opens the ballots that come from the states of the electors, and then they're to be counted. It doesn't say counted by him, but to be counted, or her, as the case may be. And then he presides over this joint session of Congress, and to the degree that the presiding officer has some authorities in terms of running the show, if you will, he has those, but I think that's where it ends. What people are arguing is that we should emphatically state that that's where it ends. And I always get nervous about stating what you're not allowed to do. Because if it doesn't say you're allowed to do it, I think that implies in and of itself. But again, lots of laws are passed to, for example, clarify the 16th Amendment, which is what gives Congress the right to set taxes on income. That's very vague. Congress has to put in very specific laws to clarify, and consequently we have the IRS code.
Members of both parties are looking at the requirements to challenge certification of a state's electoral votes. What's the standard for objecting to election results during the certification process, and should Congress make it tougher?
Yeah, good question, because the standard for challenging is simply this, that a House member and a senator both have to challenge a particular state's electoral votes in writing. And so it's not a heavy burden or high burden, but it's also been very rarely used. I think it's counting this last election, it's only been used 4 times and never successfully. So, you could say it needs to be strengthened, and yet it's worked quite well since the Constitution and since 1887. And it worked in this last case. while this last case became a much more dramatic situation, it still functioned and functioned well. So, it's not that high a standard, but again, here's where the real standard, guys, here's where the real standard is. The real standard is there's 535 members of Congress, and they come from a whole bunch of diverse places, and they are direct representation of those places. And that in and of itself provides a pretty good check and balance.
So what's the status of the efforts to amend it?
Yeah, they've sort of waned, it seems to me. There's an effort, a pretty strong bipartisan effort, as you guys pointed out, and by good senators that want to clarify it. I think that what they want to do is avoid conflict going forward, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's not been specific legislation offered up yet in the Reform Act. So we don't know, given all that's happening in Washington, in the country, the inflation, a war that nobody was planning for, a lot of other priorities, it seems to have sort of taken a back seat. Now, that's not unusual. These things often take more than one Congress. In fact, sometimes take more than one decade to get done. But it's just sort of dropped in the priority list, I think.
There's been debate over eliminating the Electoral College, and a bill was even filed in the House to amend the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College. Should the U.S. continue using the Electoral College?
Well, remember, I come from the center of the North American continent, a rectangular spot with less than 1 million people. I'm honored to be one of their 2 United States senators, having equal power with 99 of my closest friends. The founders were very, very wise in creating, first of all, a bicameral legislature that included the United States Senate, and likewise the Electoral College, which of course is a direct representation of the congressional makeup of a state, and they did that on purpose. They anticipated days when strong, large population centers could impose their will on rural areas, and they wanted to avoid that. So they made sure that every state had a proportionate say, and in some cases, maybe according to the Electoral College and the United States Senate, disproportionate say in certain things. But it's worked very well since its inception. And again, 56 really smart people signed a Declaration of Independence, 39 really smart people living in close proximity to one another at a specific time, created and signed our Constitution. And I don't see no reason to change the Electoral College, because I think it's worked very, very, very well.
Senator Kramer, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. We really appreciate you joining us for this ASP Chat.
Well, thanks. Thank you for your interest in it, because I think it is an important issue. It's not something we sit around and talk about at the kitchen table a whole lot, but we need to have the discussion in academia and around the kitchen table, perhaps.
Thank you.
Thank you.